The wind in the Four Corners had teeth in the winter of 1882. It came down from the high mesas sharp enough to peel bark from the cottonwoods and piled the snow in drifts that buried fences clear out of sight. The town of Sundown huddled in a crease of the canyon, a raw collection of pine shacks and false fronts bracing against the cold. It lived on two things, the silver being dug from the mountains and the promise of the railroad tracks that were clawing their way west. Beyond the town limits, there was nothing but rangeland, deep arroyos, and the frozen ribbon of the San Juan River. Further out, hidden in the folds of the red rock, were the Hogans of the Dean, the Navajo people, who had watched the town grow like a patch of stubborn thistle. The only place in Sundown with any real warmth was the Blue Lark Saloon. It was full of the smell of wet wool, stale beer, and the hot, reassuring scent of wood smoke from the big potbelly stove. Today, there was a new smell, one that cut right through the others. It was the smell of rich gravy, roasting meat, and a faint, surprising spice. Clara Avery stood by the saloon's big iron range, her face flushed from the heat. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and new to town. She was here on a test. Elena Rios, the woman who owned the Blue Lark, had given her 3 hours and a sack of flour to prove she was worth a winter's wages. Clara was an itinerant cook. She could make a feast out of dried beans and bacon grease, but she was quiet about it. Her skill was practical, born of countless campfires and chuck wagons. She was brave when she had to be, but shy by nature, and she was hoping the steak and kidney pie sizzling in the cast iron skillet would speak for her. She had added a touch of cinnamon to the crust. It was a small thing, a memory from a kitchen back east she barely remembered. It made the food feel less like survival and more like supper. She needed this job. Her short-term goal was simple: find work to last through the winter. Her deeper, quieter goal was to find a place where she was not just passing through, a place where she could be herself and be respected for it. The saloon was filling up as the light outside began to fail, which it did around 4 o'clock these days. In a dark corner, a small group of Chinese railroad workers ate quietly from bowls they had brought themselves. They drank the hot tea Elena provided, but otherwise kept to their own table, a silent island in the noisy room. Near the bar, 2 vaqueros, their wide sombreros resting on their knees, nursed glasses of whiskey. Their spurs, inlaid with Mexican silver, were dull in the smoky lamplight. Sergeant Isaiah Boone sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee. He was a tall man, his posture straight as a gun barrel. He had served with the 9th Cavalry, a buffalo soldier, but now he broke horses for hire. He watched the room with eyes that missed nothing, his dark face impassive. The batwing door swung open, letting in a gust of frigid air that made the lanterns flicker. Silas Rourke entered, and the temperature of the room seemed to change. He was a man from the East, dressed in a wool suit and a silk vest that looked out of place against the rough pine walls. He smiled, showing a flash of gold tooth, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He was the railroad. He was the money, and he was the future of Sundown, or so he claimed. Behind him came Sheriff Dugan. Dugan was a big man, his considerable gut stretching his flannel shirt tight over the tin star pinned to it. He was the law, but he walked 2 steps behind Rourke and laughed just a little too loud at his jokes. "A drink for everyone," Rourke announced, his voice booming over the low murmur of conversation. "To progress and to the cold weather that makes a fire feel so good." Another man had followed them in, but he did not join them. Cole Maddox leaned against the far wall by the door, his long duster coated in trail dust and ice. He was the head of a gang of rustlers, though no one said it to his face. He was Rourke's muscle, a lean, cold-eyed man who looked like he had been carved from high desert rock. He scanned the room, and his gaze lingered for a moment too long on Clara. She felt it like a cold draft and turned her attention pointedly back to the stove. Rourke and Dugan took a table near the fire. "The reports are solid, Sheriff," Rourke said, his voice dropping but still carrying. That land around Willow Basin is nothing but alkali scrub. The survey maps prove it. We can buy it for pennies on the dollar before the spring thaw." "A dry hole, just like you said." Dugan agreed. Accepting the glass of whiskey Rourke poured for him. "Their loss is our gain, Mr. Rourke." At his table, Isaiah Boone stared down into the black depths of his coffee cup. The doors opened again. This time, there was no gust of wind, no announcement. The man was just suddenly there, as if he had materialized from the shadows. His name was Ashki Nez. Ash, the white men called him. He was Dine, a warrior and a guide. He was maybe 30 years old, tall for his people, and he moved with a fluid silence that was unnerving. He wore buckskins and moccasins that made no sound on the floorboards, and a heavy wool blanket was draped over his shoulders, fastened with a single silver concho. The saloon grew quiet. Men looked down, or away. Sheriff Dugan's hand instinctively went to the butt of his pistol. Cole Maddox pushed himself off the wall, his eyes narrowing. Ash had been a scout for the cavalry. Years ago, he had left after seeing too much injustice, too many promises broken. Now, his only purpose was to protect his people, his kin, and the land that fed them, and that included the water. He ignored the hostile stares. His dark eyes swept the room, noting the vaqueros, noting Boone, noting Rourke and Dugan. His gaze was steady, assessing. He knew the rumor about Willow Basin, and he knew it was a lie. The basin held the spring, the one that fed the grazing lands his people had used for 1,000 years. Then his gaze found Clara. She was lifting the heavy skillet pie from the stove, her apron smudged with flour, her brown hair coming loose from its pins. The heat had brought a flush to her cheeks. She looked strong and tired and focused. The scent of her cooking, the beef and the cinnamon, reached him. It was the smell of care, of warmth, of something decent. It was a smell that did not belong in this place. Clara looked up, her hands full, and her eyes met his. She was startled. He was an Indian, a Navajo, and she had heard the stories. She should have been afraid, but his eyes were not cold like Cole Maddox's. They were deep and still, like the canyons at twilight. She saw a profound weariness in them, and something else, a watchfulness. She broke the gaze quickly, her heart giving a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. She was brave enough to handle a runaway team. She had sewn up a man's arm by firelight, but the quiet stare of this man undid her. She turned back to the stove, her hands trembling just a little. Ash moved to the far end of the bar, a good 10 feet from any other man. Elena Rios, a sharp-eyed woman who had inherited the saloon from her late husband and all the trouble that came with it, gave him a curt nod. He did not order a drink. He did not speak. He simply stood, a silent sentinel, watching the room. But he was aware of the woman by the fire. Clara took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and cut a wedge of the pie. The crust was golden brown, and steam rose from the thick gravy inside. She slid it onto a tin plate and handed it to Elena. Elena Rios picked up a fork. She studied the pie for a moment, then took a bite. The men at the bar watched. Clara held her breath. Elena chewed slowly, her expression unreadable. She took another bite. Then she closed her eyes for just a second. She set the fork down and looked at Clara. "You can start tomorrow," Elena said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. $8 a week and board. Clara let out the breath she had been holding. A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. At their table, Rourke leaned closer to Dugan, his voice now a low rumble. "The new survey maps will be filed in Cheyenne before the new year. It will all be legal. A cheap purchase for a priceless piece of land." Ash heard every word. He knew the map was false. The railroad was power. The stove was warmth. The ice on the river was the challenge. He looked one more time at the cook. Clara Avery was wiping her hands on her apron. her relief so plain it was almost painful to see. She was a small, warm thing in a very cold, very dangerous place. Ashki-Nez adjusted his blanket, and as silently as he had arrived, he turned and slipped back out into the biting wind, gone as if he were never there at all. Clara watched him go. The empty space where he had stood seemed suddenly colder than the rest of the room. She shivered, despite the heat from the range, and turned back to the fire. The winter had just begun. The sundown flea market was not so much a market as a collective shiver. It happened on the first Tuesday of the month, held in the frozen, rutted space between the livery and the half-finished railroad depot. People came from 20 miles around to trade what they had for what they needed. There were barrels of salted fish, bolts of flannel, second-hand harnesses, and piles of tools worn smooth by other men's hands. Clara Avery moved through the sparse crowd, her shawl pulled tight. Elena Rios had given her an advance of $2 against her wages, and Clara was guarding the coins in her mitten. She needed lard, beans, and if she could find it cheap, a bag of dried apples. The Blue Lark's pantry was lean. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine smoke and frozen manure. She saw Isaiah Boone inspecting a horse, running a knowing hand down its leg. He did not haggle. He just looked at the animal, then at the owner, and the owner named his lowest price. Lee Way, the railroad worker, was negotiating with a farmer over a sack of potatoes, using quick, efficient hand gestures and a few words of clipped English. Ashki-Nez was there, standing near a wagon of Navajo blankets. He was trading, not for money, but for supplies, silver and turquoise jewelry for flour and coffee. He stood apart, as always, a figure of quiet intensity. He watched the townsfolk, his face a mask of stone. Trouble started, as it often did, near the whiskey tent. It began with a shout. "My box! He took my cash box!" A burly man in a buffalo coat, a tanner, was pointing wildly. "It was right under my wagon." Cole Maddox and 3 of his men materialized. They always seemed to be waiting for a fire to start. "What is the matter here, friend?" Maddox asked, his voice smooth as snake oil. "My takings, a whole week's worth, near $30. One of Maddox's men, a weasel-faced man named Jeb, pointed. "Look there." A small leather pouch lay in the gray snow, not 10 feet from where Ash was standing. Jeb swaggered over and picked it up. "Well, what do you know? Feels heavy." Maddox smiled, a cold parting of his thin lips. He looked straight at Ash. "Seems our Navajo friend here was doing a little shopping." Ash did not move. He met Maddox's gaze. "I did not touch his box." "He says he did not touch it," Maddox said to the growing crowd. "But the pouch is right at his feet." "I saw him," Jeb shouted. "I saw him skulking around the wagon just before—" A murmur went through the crowd. It was a cold, bitter winter. $30 was a fortune, and blaming the Indian was the easiest thing in the world. "Thief!" someone yelled from the back. Sheriff Dugan pushed his way through, his face red with self-importance and cold. "What is all this commotion?" "Caught this one red-handed. Sheriff," Maddox said, gesturing to Ash. "Stealing from poor Jed here." "I did not," Ash said again, his voice dangerously quiet. "He is calling Jeb a liar." "Sheriff," Maddox said, feigning offense. Dugan looked at Ash, then at the angry faces in the crowd. He was a man who knew which way the wind blew, and today it blew toward blood. "Stealing is a serious offense. Ash, a hanging offense in this territory." Clara watched, her stomach turning to ice. She was pressed against the side of a feed store, the bag of beans suddenly heavy in her hand. "Let's hang him," Jeb yelled, emboldened. "String him up." The cry was picked up. "Hang him." "Now, hold on," Dugan said, raising his hands, though he was smiling. "We got laws, but a man needs to learn a lesson. Maybe a mock hanging is in order. Just to scare him straight. Show him how we treat thieves in sundown." He was playing with them, turning their anger into a sport. Two of Maddox's men, grinning, grabbed Ash's arms. Ash did not resist. He knew what it meant to fight a mob. He stood straight, his eyes fixed on Dugan. A rope appeared. Someone threw it over the high crossbeam of the depot's unfinished frame. Clara felt sick. She saw the tanner, Jed, talking quietly with Maddox. Jed was accepting a few coins from Maddox's hand. It was a payoff. Then she saw the mud. The ground under Jed's wagon, where he claimed the box had been, was shielded from the snow. It was a patch of thick, distinctive red clay, half frozen. And Jeb, the man who had pointed, had that same red clay caked on his boots. Clara looked at Cole Maddox. He was standing back, watching the fun, his arms crossed, and on his own boots, just above the heel, was a smear of the exact same red clay. He had been there. He and Jeb had staged the entire thing. They were forcing Ash's head through the noose. Dugan was laughing. "Pull it snug. Boys, let him feel the hemp." The rope was a living thing, a coiled snake that represented a death she had seen before. She remembered a wagon boss, a good man, hanged by vigilantes for a crime he did not commit. She remembered the sound his boots made, drumming against the air. She could not, she would not. Before she knew what she was doing, she dropped her bag of beans and ran forward, shoving her way through the wall of men. "Stop!" Her voice was high and thin, but it cut through the jeers. The men holding the rope paused, confused. Clara stood in the small circle of death, her shawl falling from her head, her breath pluming in the air. She was staring at Sheriff Dugan. "What in the hell is this?" Dugan growled. "Get out of the way, girl." "You cannot," Clara said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "You cannot do this." "It is just a scare, honey," one of the men said, laughing. "We are just having some fun." "He is not a thief," Clara shouted. Maddox stepped forward. "And how would you know that, little lady? Did you see him?" Clara's mind raced. She looked at Maddox, at his boots, at the rope around Ash's neck. The truth would not work. The truth was too complicated. They did not want the truth. They wanted a show. She had to give them a different one. She took a deep breath. He was with me. He was meeting me." The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dugan's jaw went slack. "What did you say?" "He is my fiancé." The words hung in the frozen air. Unbelievable. Clara looked up at Ashkenaz. His face was a thundercloud. He was completely, utterly bewildered. She had just named him, claimed him, in front of the entire town. "Fiancé," Dugan sputtered, looking from Clara to Ash and back again. This Indian." "Yes," Clara said, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She was lying in a way that could get her run out of town, or worse. But she could not stop. "We are to be married, before the spring." The crowd was dumbstruck. This was not the show they had expected. This was scandal. This was drama. A white woman, the new cook at the Blue Lark, and a Navajo warrior. The bloodlust drained away, replaced by a hungry, shocked curiosity. Elena Rios was watching from the boardwalk, her face pale. Isaiah Boone, who had moved to the edge of the crowd, slowly closed his eyes, as if in prayer. Li Wei stopped sweeping. Cole Maddox was the first to recover. His face was dark with fury. His game was ruined. "She is lying, look at her. She is just trying to save his red hide." "Am I?" Clara shot back, finding a strength she never knew she possessed. She walked right up to Dugan. "Are you going to hang a white woman's intended sheriff right here in the street, with no trial because he was standing near a wagon?" She pointed at Maddox. "Or because he told you to?" Dugan turned purple. He was trapped. The mob was no longer a weapon. It was an audience. They were waiting to see what he would do. To hang Ash now would be to admit he was just Maddox's dog. To let him go would be to lose face. He looked at Silas Rourke, who had been watching the entire spectacle from the steps of the general store. Rourke gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not now. Dugan let out a ragged breath. He hated this. He hated the girl, and he hated the Indian. "Take that rope off him," he snarled. The men holding the rope looked confused, but they obeyed. The heavy hemp coil fell away from Ash's neck. He rubbed the raw, red mark it had left. He was still looking at Clara, his dark eyes unreadable. "This is not over," Dugan said, pointing a thick finger at Ash. "I am watching you. One wrong move, one, and I will not care who you are engaged to." He stomped away, Maddox and his men following like angry hornets. The crowd began to break apart, buzzing with the story they would tell all winter. Clara was left standing in the snow, shaking so violently she could barely stand. The lie settled on her, heavy as a wet blanket. Ash stepped toward her. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her. "You should not have done that," he said. His voice was low, a rumble. It was not anger. It was a statement of fact. "They were going to kill you," she whispered, looking at the ground. I saw the mud on their boots. They set you up." He went very still. He had not seen the mud. He had only seen the trap. This woman, this quiet cook, had seen the mechanism. "The lie," he said. "I know," she said, misery washing over her. "I am sorry. I could not let them." "They will watch us now," he said. "They will wait for the lie to break." Clara nodded, her teeth chattering. "If I stay at the saloon, and you are wherever you stay, the lie will be over by morning. They will say I lied to save you. They will come for you again, and they will come for me." He saw the logic. It was a trap of her making, but he was caught in it with her. He was a man of honor by his own code. This woman had saved his life by sacrificing her reputation. He was now bound to protect her from the consequences of that act. It was a bitter, tangled knot. "I stay in the high canyons," he said, "a winter camp. It is no place for you." "I am a cook," Clara said, lifting her chin, though her eyes were filled with tears. "I can cook anywhere. I will go with you to keep the story, to repay you." "Repay me?" His voice was rough. "You saved my life." "To keep the lie," she corrected herself, her voice small. We have to make it look real, for the winter, until the thaw. Then we can say we changed our minds." He looked at her for a long time. A white woman in his camp. It was against all custom. It would bring trouble from his people and from hers, but leaving her here, after what she had done, was impossible. Dugan and Maddox would tear her apart. Clara Avery, the cook who just wanted a job, had just thrown her life away for a man she did not know, and she had just thrown his life into chaos. He gave a single slow inclination of his head. It was not a nod of agreement. It was an acceptance of a terrible, new burden. He kept his distance. He did not offer her an arm. He did not offer comfort. "Get your things from the saloon," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Meet me at the livery in 1 hour. The snow will be deep by nightfall." He turned and walked away, his moccasins making no sound on the frozen earth, leaving her alone with the scattered beans and the sudden, terrifying weight of her new life. The ride out of sundown was silent, save for the crunch of the horse's hooves in the new snow and the labored breathing of the mule Clara rode. Ashki Nez had procured the mule from the livery with a speed that suggested the owner owed him a favor, or perhaps feared him. Clara followed him, her few possessions bundled behind her, her heavy cast-iron skillet tied on with rawhide. She had returned to the Blue Lark in a daze. Elena Rios had met her at the door, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of pity and sharp anger. "You fool girl," Elena had whispered, shoving Clara's $2 back into her hand. You did not have to do that, but you did. Now he owns you." "He does not own me," Clara had insisted, though her voice trembled. "Rourke and Maddox do," Elena said flatly. "You embarrassed them. They do not forget that." She had pushed a sack of coffee and a side of bacon into Clara's arms. "Get out! Do not come back here! It is not safe for you!" Now, climbing the narrow switchback, Clara felt the full weight of her lie. The town of Sundown shrank below, a scatter of weak lights in the growing twilight. The snow was falling faster, thick and wet, clinging to her shoulders. Ash rode ahead, his blanketed form a dark shape against the gray rock. He had not spoken a word to her since the livery. They climbed for what felt like hours, moving above the tree line onto a high, wind-swept mesa. The wind here was a physical thing, a solid wall that tried to push her from the mule's back. Finally, Ash stopped. He dismounted and gestured to a dark shape half buried in a snowdrift. It was a line shack, a small box of wood built by some long-gone rancher to shelter men checking fences. It was tiny, not much bigger than a wagon bed, and it clung to the edge of a sheer cliff. Ash pushed the door open. It scraped against a drift of snow that had blown inside. The interior was dark, smelling of pack rats and old cold. There was a single, greasy window, a rusted tin stove, and a crude bunk built into the wall. Clara slid from the mule, her legs numb. This was her new home. While Ash tended to the animals, sheltering them in a small lean-to behind the shack, Clara went to work. It was the only thing she knew how to do. She swept the snow from the floorboards with a broken branch she found outside. She located the stovepipe and cleared it. By the time Ash returned with an armload of dried juniper, she had kindling laid. He dropped the wood and struck a match. The dry wood caught instantly, and the small stove began to roar. A hungry sound in the deep silence. Clara untied her skillet. She took her new sack of coffee in a small pot, filled it with clean snow from the drift, and set it on the stove to melt. The cabin was slowly filling with wood smoke and the promise of heat. They stood on opposite sides of the small room, the stove between them. The wind howled outside, a mournful, animal sound. Ash watched her. She did not look like a woman who belonged in a town. She looked like she belonged at a campfire. She was efficient, her movements economical, her hands raw but steady. When the water boiled, she dumped a heavy measure of coffee grounds into the pot and let it roil, the sharp, bitter scent filling the shack. It was thick coffee, the kind that could hold a spoon upright. She poured a cup, black and scalding, and handed it to him. He took it. Their fingers did not touch. She poured one for herself, wrapping her cold hands around the hot tin. The silence stretched. "I am sorry," Clara said, her voice quiet. The wind almost stole the words. Ash looked at her over the rim of his cup. "For the coffee?" "For the lie," she said. "In the market. I did not think. I just saw the rope. I saw their faces." "You saw the mud," he said. She nodded, surprised he knew. "On their boots, Maddox and his man. They planted the pouch." "Yes," he drank the coffee. "It does not matter. The lie is told." "I have ruined my name," she whispered, staring into the stove. "You saved my life," he replied, his voice flat. "What do we do?" she asked. "We cannot stay here all winter. People will talk. They will know we are not. We stay," he said. He moved to the small, frosted window. He rubbed a clear patch with his thumb. Far below, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a dark, frozen valley. "That is Willow Basin." She came to stand near him, looking out. "The place Rourke wants." "The place he is stealing," Ash corrected. "It is the water for my people. It is the water for all the small ranchers. He takes that. He takes everything." Clara shivered. "They will kill you. They tried today." "Today was a game," Ash said. "Rourke was testing the town, seeing how far Maddox could push.
And I stopped it,
Clara said, her voice filled with a sudden bitterness.
and now I am here.
She faced him, her fear suddenly giving way to a spark of anger. You are bound to me now. Are you not, because of my lie? Because I saved you? He met her gaze. His eyes were dark, and for the first time she saw the full depth of the trouble she was in. By the Dine custom, a life saved is a life you are responsible for. You saved mine.
So you are responsible for me,
she said. No, he said, and his quiet voice cut through her anger. It means I am responsible to you. You risked your honor. I will protect it.
How? She demanded. By keeping me in this box as your fake wife.
I give you my word, he said. As a Dine, you are under my protection. No harm will come to you, not from me, not from any man. Your name, your safety, they are my duty. It was not a declaration of love. It was not comfort. It was a promise, as hard and cold as the iron stove. It was a sentence for both of them. A sudden, sharp knock on the door made them both jump. Ash moved, silent as a shadow. He put his hand on the knife at his belt. He stood to the side of the door. Who is it? It is Li Wei, a voice called, thin against the wind. Boone sent me. Let me in. Ash, it is cold. Ash slid the wooden bar back. Li Wei stumbled in, covered in snow, his face gray with cold and fear. He was carrying a square, oilcloth-wrapped package under his thin coat. Clara immediately pushed her own cup of coffee into his frozen hands. He drank it gratefully, his teeth chattering. You are a fool to follow me in this storm, Ash said. I am a bigger fool if I stay in that town. Li Wei said. He looked at Clara, his sharp eyes taking in the situation. The single bunk, the skillet, the man and the woman. The story is all over town. The Navajo's white bride. Maddox is angry. He is drinking at the Blue Lark. What is that? Ash asked, nodding at the package. Li Wei unwrapped it. It was a ledger book, identical to the ones used at the railroad office. I am a clerk, Li Wei said. I see the telegraphs. I see the freight manifests. And I see Mr. Rourke's private ledgers. He thinks I cannot read English well. He is wrong. He opened the book. The pages were filled with neat, precise script. He is very careful, but I copied it, all of it. He pointed to a line. Look, October. Payment to H. Harris Surveyor, $500. Harris is the man who drew the new map. The map that says Willow Basin is dry. It is a lie, Ash said. It is a very expensive lie. Li Wei said, and this? He turned a page. Payments to Cole Maddox, every week, security, land acquisition. He is not buying land. He is scaring people away, or killing them. Clara felt cold. This was not just a rumor. This was a war. What do we do with this? She asked. This changes nothing for Rourke, not yet. Li Wei said, the fake map is already filed in Cheyenne. Rourke is waiting in 6 weeks. Just after the new year, he will send a final telegraph. It will confirm the sale. Citing the surveyor's map, it will all be legal. Finished. He will be home free, as he says. 6 weeks, Ash said. We have to hold this, Li Wei said, pressing the book into Ash's hands. Rourke does not know I have it, but he will check his books eventually. When he finds out, he will look for me. He will look for you. You must go, Ash said. Go now. Head east. Take the railroad tracks. No, Li Wei said. I go back. I am just a clerk. He will not suspect me. Not yet. I will listen. Elena Rios is listening, too. He looked worried. Dugan went to see her. He told her to stop asking questions about the basin. He warned her, but she will not stop. She is a strong woman, like you, he said, nodding to Clara. He pulled his coat tight. Survive the winter, Both of you, keep this book safe. When the thaw comes, the federal marshal will come through on the train. We must give it to him. It is the only way." Li Wei bowed his head slightly to Clara, then to Ash, and slipped back out into the storm. Ash barred the door. The wind shrieked as if it knew the secret the cabin now held. They were trapped by the snow, trapped by the lie, and now trapped by the truth. Clara went to the window. The world outside was a churning wall of white. She could not see the basin anymore. She pressed her hand against the cold, greasy glass, leaving a perfect, clear print of her palm. She watched her own breath fog the pane, obscuring the view. Ash sat by the stove. He took the ledger and wrapped it carefully in the oilcloth. He stored it in a small, dry space under the bunk. He picked up her skillet from the hearth. He looked at it, testing the weight. It was a good tool, a heavy tool. He drew his knife. Clara turned, startled. "What are you doing?" He did not answer. He turned the skillet over and studied the worn wooden handle. With the tip of his blade, he began to carve into the wood. He worked with quick, precise strokes. He carved two small, intersecting triangles, an old Dine symbol, a sign for the holy people, a mark of protection. He finished and held the skillet out to her. She took it, her fingers tracing the new, sharp edges of the carving. It was rough against the smooth, worn wood. It was her skillet, her one possession of value, her livelihood. And he had marked it. He had marked it as his. He had marked it as theirs. She looked at him, and he looked at her. 6 weeks, she said. We will be ready. Ashki Nez said. He turned his gaze from her to the door, listening to the storm, already planning for the men who would follow it. The line shack was not built for 2 people. It was barely built for 1. The wind found every crack in the chinking, and the snow piled in fine, sugary drifts under the door. In the first week, they lived around the stove. Ash slept on the floor, his saddle for a pillow, his heavy blanket wrapped tight. He placed himself between the door and the bunk, a silent, living barrier. Clara took the narrow bunk, her back to the cold wall, her skillet and the hidden ledger beneath her. But Clara Avery was a cook, and a cook does not just inhabit a space, she organizes it. By the second week, the line shack was no longer just a shelter, it was a camp kitchen. She scrubbed the pine boards with lye soap and hot snow water until the smell of pack rats was replaced by the clean, sharp scent of lye. She designated a clean corner for the sacks of flour, beans, and coffee. Raised off the floor on flat stones Ash brought her. She insisted on a hygiene that Ash found alien but necessary in these close quarters. A pot of water was always kept boiling, not just for coffee, but for washing. She made bread in the heavy skillet, dense cornbread cooked in bacon grease. She made stew from the rabbits Ash trapped, simmering the tough meat for hours with dried chilies and wild onions he dug from beneath the snow. And she made coffee. It was coffee born of desperation, boiled and reboiled with the grounds until it was a thick, black syrup that stained the tin cups. It was, Ash admitted silently, the strongest coffee he had ever had. It was the coffee of a siege. They lived by a rhythm. Before dawn, Ash would rise without a sound. He would slide out the door to check his traps and survey the ridge. Clara would rise in the gray light, break the ice in the water bucket, and light the stove. The day was spent on survival and on training. Maddox will not wait for the thaw, Ash said one afternoon, the sky a low, bruised purple. He will come for the book, or for us. He took her outside, into the blinding white. He handed her his rifle. It was heavy, the stock worn smooth, the metal cold as death. You know how to shoot. I have shot a pistol, Clara said, at snakes. This is not a snake, Ash said. He pointed to a dark knot on a dead pine, 50 yards away. You have 5 cartridges. You will hit it 5 times. She missed the first 2 shots. The recoil slammed the butt of the rifle into her shoulder. A brutal, numbing punch. The sound was deafening, swallowed by the snow.
"You are afraid of it,"
he said, his voice quiet, without judgment. "You are closing your eyes. Do not fight the rifle. Let it be part of your arm.
Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull."
She took a breath. She let it out. She squeezed. The rifle bucked. But this time, she was ready. A small puff of bark flew from the edge of the knot. Again. She hit it, and again. By the time the rifle was empty, her shoulder was a deep ache and her hands were numb. But she had hit the target 3 times out of 5. "You learn," he said. It was the highest praise she had yet received from him. He taught her to see. "The snow tells you everything," he said, pointing to a faint disturbance. A rabbit. He was moving fast. "See the spray?" Something was chasing him. He taught her to walk at night, moving from the shadow of one rock to the next, to use the starlight on the snow to see, rather than the darkness. "1 shot," he told her, as they cleaned the rifle by the stove. "Always, 1 shot is best. It means you are in control. 2 shots mean you are found. 3 shots mean you are desperate." On the 3rd week, Isaiah Boone appeared. He rode up the trail not on his own horse, but on a shaggy mountain pony, leading a mule loaded with supplies. Clara, who was on watch, saw him coming a mile away. She had hung a bent horseshoe from the doorframe. She struck it once with a metal spoon. The high, clear clang was the signal for food, or a friend. Boone dismounted, his face stiff with cold. He looked at Ash, then at Clara, and then at the tiny shack. He nodded, as if a question had been answered. "Sergeant," Ash greeted him. "Ash," Boone replied. He unwrapped the mule. "Elena Rios sends her compliments." He unloaded sacks of flour, salt, and smoked pork. "And the men from the rail yard send this." He pulled out a box of rifle cartridges. Lee Wei made a collection. He accepted a cup of Clara's thick coffee and warmed his hands by the stove. "The town is a bad place right now. Clara, you were smart to leave." "It was not smart," Clara said, her voice bitter. "It was foolish." "It was what you did," Boone said, his voice the deep rumble of a man who had seen too much to judge. "Now you must live with it." Boone stayed. He said he was hired to guard the happy couple's supplies. He built a dugout shelter farther down the ridge, but he spent his days with them, enforcing a new discipline. He was a soldier. He taught them how to set a watch rotation, how to build a perimeter, how to spot the glint of a spyglass from the rocks below. The line shack became a guard post. "Rourke is squeezing the town," Boone reported, his voice low. "He is using that telegraph wire like a whip, sent a message out that his crews are being threatened." A day later, a new rumor starts. "Dine rustlers. They say a band of Navajo hit a ranch south of here." "A lie," Ash said, staring into the fire. "Of course," Boone said, "but it makes people scared. It makes them hate. It makes them look at men like you, Ash, and see a thief. It makes them look at her." He nodded at Clara. "And see something worse." "What about Elena and Lee Wei?" Clara asked. "Elena's keeping the Blue Lark open," Boone said. "She hears everything. The vaqueros from the ranches that are being choked out. They drink there. They talk. They are starting to realize this drought is not natural. Elena is fanning that flame. And Lee Wei, he has his ear to the rail. He reports every time Rourke sends a wire." The alliance was a spider's web, thin and fragile, held together by quiet ones. A saloon keeper, a railroad clerk, an ex-soldier, and 2 men, vaqueros named Miguel and Juan, who now rode patrol on the low range, watching for Maddox's men. The attack came on a Monday, cold and bright. The sun was sharp on the snow. Ash and Boone were checking a trap line on the far side of the mesa. Clara was alone, on watch. The horseshoe hung silent. They had stashed the bulk of their new flour in a shallow cave just below the shack's ridge, covered with a tarp and snow. It was too much to fit inside. Clara saw the movement first. 2 men creeping through the low pines. She recognized the weasel-faced man from the market. Jeb. She reached for the horseshoe and struck it twice. Clang, clang. The alarm. She heard a shout from below. The men knew they were spotted. They ran for the cache. She grabbed Ash's rifle. It was loaded. She rested it on the rock ledge. Breathe out. Squeeze. She aimed at the man in the lead. Jeb! She fired. The shot was wide. It kicked up snow 10 feet to his left. He laughed and kept running. She shoots like a woman, he yelled to his partner. They reached the cave. They were ripping the tarp off the flour. They were going to take it all. Without that flour, she and Ash would not last 3 more weeks. She fumbled, trying to reload. Her hands were shaking. She heard the distant crack of Ash's rifle from the far ridge. An answer, but he was too far away. The men were grabbing the sacks. Clara looked around, desperate. The stove. She had just refilled it. Beside it was the tin of lye soap and the small bag of flour she used for her bread, and the ash bin, full of gray, powdery soot. She acted without thinking, the way she had in the market. She grabbed her heavy skillet, the one with Ash's carving on the handle. She dumped the hot, glowing coals from the stove into it. She threw the entire contents of the ash bin on top, followed by the full bag of flour. A thick, choking cloud of hot ash and blinding white flour erupted. She ran to the edge of the cliff, holding the sizzling, smoking skillet. The men were directly below her, loading the flour onto their horses. "Hey!" she screamed. They looked up, their faces surprised. She heaved the entire contents of the skillet down on top of them. It was a perfect hit. A cloud of scalding ash, hot coals, and blinding flour enveloped them. The men screamed. One dropped his sack, clawing at his eyes. The horses panicked, rearing and screaming as the hot coals hit their backs. "My eyes!" Jeb shrieked, firing his pistol wildly into the air. Crack! A single shot from the high ridge. Jeb's partner, who had been trying to control his horse, slumped forward, a dark stain spreading on his back. He did not make a sound. Jeb was on his knees, coughing, his face a white and gray mask. He raised his pistol, aiming blindly toward the cliff edge where Clara stood. Crack, crack! 2 more shots from Ash's rifle, fast as thought. The first one spun Jeb around. The second one laid him flat in the snow. Silence. The only sound was one of the horses, screaming in the pines. Then it, too, went quiet. Clara leaned against the rock, her legs giving out. She was covered in her own ammunition, her face pale beneath a dusting of flour. It was a full hour before Ash and Boone made it back. Boone went down to deal with the bodies and the remaining supplies. Ash climbed the final ledge to the shack. Clara was sitting by the cold stove, her hands shaking in her lap. He walked in. He looked at her, at the empty flour sack, at the soot on the floor. He saw the rifle, propped by the door. He looked at her hands. They were raw. One of them blistered from the heat of the skillet. They were trembling, but they were the hands that had saved them. He said nothing. He walked to his small pack and took out a small tin. He opened it. It was full of dark bear grease, something he used for his moccasins and his rifle. He set it down on the table in front of her, pushing it gently toward her. Clara looked at the tin. She looked at him. He was a killer. He had just killed 2 men to protect her, to protect their food. She should have been horrified. But as she looked at his hard, unreadable face, she felt a profound and terrible thing. She felt safe. The town, with its laws and its sheriff, was a place of terror. This shack, with this man who spoke in silence and rifles, was the only sanctuary she had. She dipped a finger into the dark grease and began, slowly and painfully, to rub it into her raw hands. She realized, in that moment, that she trusted Ashkenaz with her life. It was a trust that terrified her. The world turned white. The storm that had been threatening on the horizon for a week finally broke. Not as a gentle snow, but as an Arctic assault. It was a whiteout, a howling, solid wall of wind and ice that erased the sky, the ground, and the line between them. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Inside the shack, the wind was a high, thin scream in the stovepipe. Clara, Ash, and Boone were trapped, 3 people in a box of wood that felt as fragile as a matchbox. They had been inside for 2 days, existing in the smoky twilight of the stove. The tension was as thick as the coffee. Down in sundown, the same storm had paralyzed the town, but it could not stop the anger brewing in the Blue Lark. Cole Maddox was drinking, his temper as foul as the weather. He had lost 2 men, good men in his estimation, and he had lost them to a cook and an Indian. It was an insult that demanded blood. He was at the bar, harassing one of the saloon girls, a young woman named Ruby. She was new, her face pale with a fear that had not yet hardened into the indifference of her trade.
"You are not listening to me,"
Maddox growled, his hand closing on her arm.
"I said, pour me another, and then you are coming upstairs."
"She is working, Mr. Maddox," Elena Rios said, her voice sharp. She was polishing a glass, her knuckles white. Maddox turned, a sneer on his face. "She works for me when I say she does. Stay out of it, widow." "This is my saloon," Elena said, setting the glass down. She picked up the heavy, scalding pot of coffee from the stove. "She is under my protection, and I say she stays down here." Maddox looked at the coffee pot, then at the hard set of Elena's jaw. He looked at the vaqueros, Miguel and Juan, who were watching him from their table. He looked at the quiet determination in Elena's eyes. He wanted to hit her. He wanted to break something. But Silas Rourke had warned him no more public spectacles, not after the botched hanging. He let go of Ruby's arm, shoving her so she stumbled. "You are lucky, widow, but this town is not yours for much longer." He threw a coin on the bar and stalked out into the storm. Ruby was shaking, rubbing her arm. Elena put the pot down. "He is all bluff," she said, though her own hand was trembling. "No, he is not," Ruby whispered, tears in her eyes. I heard him yesterday. He was talking to Mr. Rourke in the back room. Rourke was angry. He said the cash transfer for the Gatling gun has to be secure. He is buying a Gatling gun, ma'am. He said he is going to clear the squatters off the basin himself, just as soon as this storm breaks." Elena's blood went cold. A Gatling gun. This was not a land grab anymore. It was an escalation to slaughter. Up on the mesa, the wind was a physical force. Ash and Boone had been outside, securing the horses in the lean-to, their bodies wrapped in every blanket they had. The wind was driving the snow horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. Clara was alone in the shack, tending the fire. She had a pot of dried beans simmering, the lid rattling. The beans were their insurance. She counted them every day, a handful at a time, calculating how long they could last. She heard a sound that was not the wind. It was the terrified whinny of a horse, too close. She ran to the small window, rubbing the frost. In the churning white, she saw them, shapes, 4 of them. 4 men on horseback, their faces wrapped, bent low against the wind. Maddox. He had used the whiteout for cover. They were inside the perimeter. She looked at the door. Ash and Boone were still outside. The attackers were between her and them. She reached for the rifle, her heart in her throat. But she knew Ash's rule: 1 shot to warn, 2 if you are found, 3 if you are desperate. She needed to warn them, but she also needed a diversion. Her eyes fell on the pot of beans. It was a heavy cast-iron pot, thick with steam. An idea, born of kitchen physics and pure terror, sparked in her mind. She grabbed a spare piece of wood and her thickest rag. The men were dismounting, pulling their rifles. They were 30 yards out. Clara jammed the wood between the pot lid and the handle, sealing it tight. The rattling stopped. The steam was trapped. She shoved the heavy pot directly onto the red-hot center of the stove. The high, thin whistle of the wind was joined by a new sound, a rising, piercing scream from the pot. Outside, Maddox and his men heard it. They stopped, looking around wildly. "What is that?" one of them yelled. "It sounds like a fuse," another shouted, panic in his voice. "Dynamite! It is a mine!" Clara grabbed a long iron poker. The pot was vibrating, hissing from every pore. She braced herself. "Now!" she screamed. She jammed the poker under the wooden wedge and flipped it free. The explosion was not fire, it was steam, a catastrophic release of pressure. The lid flew off and slammed into the ceiling. A scalding white cloud of steam, boiling water, and half-cooked beans erupted from the pot, hitting the opposite wall like a shotgun blast. The sound was deafening, a wet whump that shook the small cabin. The men outside dove for cover, convinced a mine had gone off. And in that instant of confusion, 2 rifle shots cracked from the lean-to, Ash and Boone. The fight was a chaotic nightmare of orange flashes in a white world. The attackers, blind and spooked, fired wildly at the cabin. Bullets tore through the thin pine walls. Clara was on the floor, her arms over her head, her skillet clutched to her chest. She heard Ash yell. She heard Boone cry out, a sharp, choked sound. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The shooting stopped, replaced by the shouts of men retreating, the thunder of hoofbeats fading into the howl of the storm. The silence that fell was worse than the gunfire. "Clara," Ash's voice. "Bar the door, bar it now." She scrambled up, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. A moment later, he was at the door. "Clara, open it." She pulled the bar back. Ash stumbled in, half dragging Isaiah Boone. The ex-soldier was gray, his face twisted in pain. A dark, wet stain was spreading across his thigh. "He is hit," Ash said, his voice grim. "Get him by the fire." They laid him on the bunk. The bullet had torn through the thick muscle of his leg. It was a graze, passing clean through, but it was deep, and it was bleeding. "Whiskey," Clara said. Ash pulled a flask from Boone's own coat. Clara's terror vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was a cook. This was just another kind of butchery. "Boil water," she commanded Ash. "Get my sewing tin, the small one, and hold him still." She gave the flask to Boone. "Drink," she said. He took a long, ragged swallow. She tore his pant leg open. The wound was raw and bleeding freely. She took the flask from him and, without apology, poured the remaining whiskey directly onto the open flesh. Boone roared, a deep, animal sound of pure agony. Ash put his full weight on the man's shoulders, holding him down. Clara took the needle and the thick thread from her tin. She had dropped them into the boiling water for a full minute. She threaded the needle, her hands perfectly steady. "Bite this," she said, shoving a piece of leather into Boone's mouth. She began to sew. Her stitches were small, tight, and practical. She worked with the same efficient motions she used to truss a chicken, closing the wound, her face pale in the lamplight, her lips a thin, white line. Ash watched her, his expression unreadable. He had seen cavalry surgeons with less steady hands. When she was done, she bandaged the wound with a torn flour sack and collapsed on the stool, her body shaking. The storm raged for 2 more days. They were 3 people in a bleeding, damaged room. Boone was hot with fever, but he was alive. Ash sat by the door, his rifle across his knees. Awake. Clara counted her beans, boiled her water, and waited. On the 3rd morning, they woke to silence. The wind had died. The world outside was a pristine, brilliant blue and white, buried under 4 feet of new snow. "I am going out," Ash said. "Ash, no," Clara whispered. They left in a hurry, he said. They might have left a horse. Or a body.
He was gone for an F. He returned, his face like carved rock. He was carrying something under his arm.
He kicked the snow from his moccasins and dropped a small, red leather book on the table. It was frozen stiff, the cover warped.
One of them did not make it, Ash said. Frozen adrift, not 50 yards from here.
He was Maddox's right-hand man. Clara stared at the book. It was a ledger. Not like Lee Wei's. This one was bound in expensive red leather. Ash took his knife and carefully pried the frozen cover open. The pages were filled with neat, spidery script. It was a list of payments, but not from Rourke. These were payments to Sheriff Dugan, for services rendered, for Navajo problem, for market incident, and in a pocket at the back, folded into a neat square, was a piece of oilcloth. Ash unfolded it. It was not a surveyor's sketch. It was a detailed, professional map. It showed Willow Basin, and across its narrowest point, 2 red lines were drawn. Proposed dam site, S. Rourke, ESQ. It showed exactly how the dam would be built, and how it would cut off every drop of water that fed the lower valleys. This was it. Lee Wei's ledger was the lie about the land. This red book was the proof of the conspiracy and the blueprint for the crime. Clara looked at the dark bloodstain on the floor of the bunk, still damp from Boone's wound. She looked at the red book, the price of their survival.
"It is my fault," she whispered, her voice cracking. "All of this, the shooting, Mr. Boone, the men who died. It is because I lied. I brought this all on you."
She was shaking, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Ash, who was standing over the table, looked at her. He saw her breaking. He reached out. It was not a gentle gesture. He covered her clenched, white-knuckled fist with his own large, calloused hand. It was the first time he had ever truly touched her. His hand was rough and surprisingly warm, and it stilled her shaking instantly. "No," he said, his voice low and absolute. "They died because of this." He tapped the red book with his free hand. "This is the evil. You are the one who stood against it. You and Boone and Lee Wei. We stand against it." He held her hand for 1 second. A hard, grounding pressure that seemed to pull the fear right out of her. Then he let go. Clara slowly unclenched her hand. The blood on the snow was the price. The beans she counted were patience. But the book was the weapon. The stakes had changed. It was not just their honor anymore. It was not just survival. It was the water. It was the entire valley. And the spring thaw was coming. If they did not get this proof to the marshal before the ice melted, Rourke would build his dam, and everything would be lost. The change did not come gently. It came with a sound like cannon fire, a series of deep, guttural cracks that echoed off the canyon walls. The winter did not end. It shattered. For 3 days, the temperature had climbed, and the high mesa, buried for months, began to weep. The snow turned to slush, the ground to a thick, sucking mud. And then, in the middle of the night, the San Juan River broke. The ice, 3 feet thick, heaved and tore apart. The roar was a living thing, the sound of a chained giant breaking free. Great plates of ice, big as cabins, ground against each other, piling up, damming the water, and then bursting free in a churning, brown flood. The water was not water. It was a moving wall of mud, ice, and uprooted trees. "The thaw," Boone said, his voice grim. He was standing at the edge of the line shack, leaning on a rifle as a crutch. His leg was healing, but he walked with a soldier's stiff limp. "The marshal's train will be through in 3 days. Lee Wei sent word with Miguel." "We have to move," Ash said. He was packing the 2 ledgers, the black one and the red one, into an oilcloth wrap. Rourke will move too. The mud will not stop him. Their fortress was now a prison. The high ground was an island in a sea of melt. Clara looked at their supplies. They had a borrowed chuck wagon. One Boone had acquired from a rancher who owed him money, hidden in the pines. It was their only way to move Boone and the supplies. "We cannot ride. The ground is too soft. We will have to take the wagon."
"Maddox will be watching the trails," Ash said. "He will be watching the stone bridge," Boone corrected. "It is the only way into town, the only way across that." He nodded toward the river, which was now a terrifying, roaring beast. "Then that is where we go," Clara said, her voice quiet. She was strapping her heavy skillet to the outside of her pack. "We have no choice." The journey down from the mesa was a nightmare. The wagon wheels sank to their axles in mud. Ash, on his horse, scouted, while Clara and a grimacing Boone fought the wagon. They pushed, they laid branches for traction, they cursed, and they slipped, caked in the cold, red mud. It took them half a day to travel 2 miles. By late afternoon, they reached the canyon road that led to sundown. The stone bridge was a mile ahead. The river was a deafening roar to their right. The air was thick with mist and the smell of wet earth. Ash held up a hand. He had dismounted, his moccasins soaked. He knelt, studying the road. 6 riders. They passed this way an hour ago, heading for the bridge. They are waiting. Clara's stomach went cold. Maddox. "We are trapped," Boone said, his hand going to the pistol at his belt. "We cannot go back up that hill." Ash looked at the wagon. He looked at Clara. "We go through." "Through 6 rifles," Boone said, his voice flat. Clara looked at the back of the wagon, at her supplies, sacks of flour, casks of water. Her mind went back to the fight at the shack, to the flour and the hot ash. "They are waiting for us, on the other side." "In the rocks," Ash agreed. "A perfect ambush." "They will be on horseback," Clara said, her mind racing. "Ready to ride us down on the bridge." "They will," Ash said. "The bridge is stone," she said, almost to herself. "It is wet. It is already slick." She looked at Ash, her eyes wide. "What if we made it slicker?" Ash looked at the flour sacks. He looked at the water casks. A slow, dangerous understanding lit his dark eyes. "Clara," Boone said, "that is our food. We will not need food if we are dead." She said, she grabbed her sharpest knife. "Mr. Boone, can you drive this team?" "I can," he said, his jaw set. "Then drive it like you are going through the gates of hell." Clara said, "Ash, come up here with me. We are going to make a mess." Ash swung into the wagon bed. Clara cut the ropes on 2 of the 50-pound flour sacks. She smashed the lid on the nearest water cask with a hatchet. "Now, Mr. Boone," Ash roared. Boone let out a yell that was half soldier, half madman. He cracked the whip over the mules' heads. The wagon lurched and then shot forward, its heavy wheels spraying mud. They hit the entrance to the bridge at a full gallop. The stone bridge was an old, high arch, wide enough for 1 wagon, with a low stone parapet on either side. Far below, the river churned. At the far end, as predicted, Maddox and his men burst from the rocks, yelling in triumph. They spurred their horses onto the bridge, a solid wall of 6 riders, rifles up, coming to meet the wagon head-on. "Now!" Clara screamed. She and Ash tipped the water cask. A great wave of water sluiced over the back of the wagon, pouring onto the stone flags. Ash tore open the flour sacks, dumping a cloud of white powder directly into the flood. The water and flour mixed instantly, turning the gray stone into a sheet of thick, white, greasy paste. Maddox's men were charging at full speed. They hit the slurry a second later. The result was catastrophic. The lead horse's legs went out from under it as if it had stepped on pure ice. It went down in a screaming heap, sending its rider flying. The horses behind it tried to stop, to turn, but they had no purchase. They crashed into each other, a terrible sliding tangle of flailing hooves, panicked animal screams, and cursing men. The bridge was pure chaos. Boone, however, could not stop. The wagon, heavy as it was, hit its own slick. The mules, terrified by the noise behind them, began to panic. The wagon skidded, its back end sliding sideways, crashing hard into the low stone wall. The entire wagon tilted, the right wheel hanging over the edge, above the roaring, icy water. "We are going over," Clara screamed, grabbing the side. Boone, with a grunt of pure agony, threw himself from the driver's seat. He grabbed a heavy wooden wheel block they used for hills and, ignoring his wounded leg, threw his entire body under the high side of the wagon, jamming the block behind the good wheel. There was a sickening wet crack. Boone cried out, a sharp, choked sound, as the wagon's weight settled, crushing him against the inner wall. But it held. The wagon stabilized, its wheels still spinning over the abyss. Boone slumped to the stones, his face gray, his arm clutched to his chest. "Ribs!" he gasped. "Go! Go!" Maddox was on his feet. His horse was down, but he was up, his face a mask of fury. He was in the middle of the bridge, cut off by his own fallen men. He raised his pistol, aiming not at Ash, but at Clara. Ash did not hesitate. He launched himself from the wagon bed, his long knife in his hand. He landed on the slurry and did not try to stand. He used the slickness, sliding on his side, a human bullet, moving with impossible speed. Maddox fired. The shot went wild, the recoil on the slick stone throwing his aim off. Ash was on him. He slammed into Maddox's legs, cutting them out from under him. The pistol flew from Maddox's hand, skittering across the bridge and disappearing over the side into the river. Maddox roared and pulled his own knife. They were on the ground. Two men, sliding and grappling in a paste of flour and mud, on a narrow bridge above a killing flood. Maddox was a brawler. He was strong, but Ash was a warrior. He did not fight the ground. He used it. He twisted, letting Maddox's weight carry him past. He drove his elbow into Maddox's face. Maddox's head hit the stone. Ash was on top, the point of his knife pressed hard under Maddox's chin. They were both breathing in ragged gasps. Maddox's eyes were wide, filled with hate and the sudden, cold fear of death. Ash looked at him. He saw the man who had tried to hang him, the man who had sent raiders to his camp, the man who had just tried to kill Clara. He pressed the blade. A drop of blood welled. "No," Clara said. Her voice was thin, but it cut through the roar of the river. She was standing over them, the rifle in her hands. Ash looked up at her. His face was a killer's mask. "Do not," she said. "We bring him in. We bring them all in, the legal way." Ash's breath came out in a long, slow hiss. The rage passed. He was in control again. He looked down at Maddox. "She is right. Your justice is waiting." He slammed the hilt of his knife against Maddox's temple. The man went limp. They limped into sundown an hour later, Ash on his horse, leading the captured horses of Maddox's men, who were tied up and walking. Clara drove the wagon, her face white and stained with flour. Boone lay in the back, silent with pain, his ribs bound tight with a torn sheet. In the back, Cole Maddox was tied, unconscious. The town came to a standstill. Sheriff Dugan met them in the middle of the street, his face a perfect picture of shocked concern. "Good Lord, Miss Avery, what happened here?" "Maddox," Ash said, his voice flat. He kicked the bound man, who groaned. "He ambushed us at the stone bridge." "My word," Dugan said, his eyes wide. He looked at the other 5 prisoners. "You caught the whole gang, an amazing feat." He puffed out his chest. "Do not you worry. The law will take it from here." He gestured to his deputies. "Lock them up, all of them. Cole Maddox, you are under arrest for attempted murder." Maddox, now conscious, just smiled, a thin, bloody smile. Dugan tipped his hat to Clara. "You look all done in, ma'am, you and your husband. Go get some rest at the hotel.
Justice will be served. You have my word." That night, they were in a room at the hotel. Boone was in the next room, attended by Elena Rios, who had brought whiskey and bandages. Li Wei slipped into their room, his face pale. "Rourke is at the telegraph office," he said, his voice a low whisper. "He has been sending messages all day. More lies about rustlers to justify his new purchase." "The Gatling gun," Ash said. "Yes, but I did it," Li Wei said, a small, fierce smile on his face. "While he was busy, I got my own message out. I changed the routing. It did not go to Cheyenne. It went to the marshal, at his last stop in Durango. I told him, the ledgers are here. Rourke is building a dam. I told him, ambush. He will be here, maybe tomorrow." There was a knock. It was Elena. Her face was hard. "I just came from the jail." "And Maddox?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "Gone," Elena said. "The back door is wide open. Dugan's deputy says he was overpowered. Dugan is at the Blue Lark right now, buying a round of drinks, saying what a terrible, slippery devil Maddox is." The corruption was complete. The law was a joke. At the telegraph office, a runner brought a message to Silas Rourke. It told him of Maddox's escape. Rourke tore the paper in half. He had lost the bridge. He had lost his men. The ledgers were in town, and the marshal was on his way. His plan was falling apart. He turned to his own men, the hard-faced guards from the railroad. "The time for games is over," he said, his voice cold and quiet. "Dawn, we move the cash reserve from the bank to the armored train car. At the same time, the second crew, with the Gatling, rides for Willow Basin. They start building the dam. Now, I do not care who is in the way. We finish this." The pincer was closing. Tomorrow, the war for Willow Basin would finally come to sundown. The hotel room was too small for the news it held. The air was close, smelling of stale whiskey, damp wool, and fear. Outside the single window, sundown was a ghost town, battened down against the night and the roar of the river. The thaw was in full force. Water dripped from the eaves, a frantic, ticking sound against the deep bass of the flood. Elena Rios and Li Wei had just left, their face set in grim lines. The news was absolute. Maddox was free. Rourke was moving at dawn, and the federal marshal was a day away. At best, he would arrive to find a war already finished. Isaiah Boone was in the next room. They could hear him cough, a dry, painful sound. He was alive, but he was badly broken. Clara and Ash were alone. The potbelly stove in the corner provided the only real warmth, its small iron door glowing a dull, angry red. They had been silent for nearly 10 minutes. Ash stood by the window, a shadow against the weak moonlight, watching the street. Clara sat on the edge of the hard cot, her hands knotted in her lap. "We have the ledgers," she said, her voice thin. "We have the map." "They are paper," Ash said, not turning. "Rourke has a Gatling gun. Dugan has the law. Maddox has the will. Paper will not stop them." "Li Wei's message," she pressed. "The marshal." "Rourke will own the basin by noon tomorrow. The marshal will arrive to a legal dam, protected by paid men. Our paper will be just a story, a dead woman's story, a dead man's." Clara stood up. She felt a cold, deep anger that pushed back the fear. She was tired of being cold. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of running. She walked to the stove, picked up the iron poker, and jabbed at the coals. A cloud of bright sparks flew up the chimney. "So we do not use paper," she said, her voice hard. "We use what we have. We use his own plan against him. He wants the cash. He wants the dam. He cannot be in two places at once." Ash turned from the window. He looked at her. The firelight caught the stubborn set of her jaw. The woman he had met in the Blue Lark was gone. The woman who had been afraid in the line shack was gone. This woman was a stranger, forged in flour and gunfire. She was still holding the poker, her knuckles white. She looked down at her hands, raw from the lye soap and the cold, and her anger seemed to drain away, leaving her exhausted. She leaned her forehead against the rough pine wall next to the stove. She let out a breath, a long, shuddering sigh. Slowly, she unfastened the thick wool scarf from around her neck. Her hair, pinned up in a practical, tight knot, had come loose in places. Small strands clung to her damp forehead. She pushed them back, her hand leaving a small smudge of soot on her temple. Her hair, her clothes, her skin, they all smelled faintly of wood smoke. It was a smell that would never leave her now. Ash moved. He crossed the small room in 2 silent steps. He did not touch her. He just stood behind her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She froze, her back to him, her forehead still pressed against the wall. He did not put his hands on her shoulders. He did not touch her waist. He simply leaned in, his head close to hers. He was a man who lived by his senses, by the smell of pine and the track of a deer. He breathed in the scent of her. It was not perfume. It was soot and lye, and the faint, clean smell of her skin. It was the smell of survival. It was the smell of home. He lowered his head, his lips, dry from the cold, brushed the soft, stray hairs at the nape of her neck. It was not a kiss. It was a benediction, a bare, fleeting contact. Then he moved, his lips brushing the crown of her hair, and he whispered, the words a low vibration against her scalp, meant for her and her alone. You're my spring. Clara stopped breathing. Her heart, which had been a cold stone in her chest, seemed to crack open. He was the winter, the ice, the stone, the silent, frozen mesa. And she, with her fire and her bread and her stubborn warmth, had been the thaw. She did not turn. She could not. Instead, she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She let her body relax, just an inch, leaning back. Her shoulders, her back, rested against his chest. He was solid. He was real. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart through his buckskin shirt. It was the surest, safest thing she had ever felt. This was not a lie. This was not a pretense to save a life. This was the truth. They stood like that for a long time, the only sound the drip of the melting snow and the low, steady beat of his heart against her back.
Tomorrow,
she whispered, her voice thick.
We may not, Ash, we might die tomorrow.
I know, he said. His voice was a rumble in her ear.
If we die, I do not want to die hungry,
she said, a strange, small laugh catching in her throat. He did not laugh. He understood. When this is done, he said, his voice quiet, we will eat, not stew, not rabbit.
No,
she whispered, closing her eyes, leaning into him.
We will eat food from a garden. I will make chicken roasted with wild thyme and corn, and you will show me.
She faltered. You will show me where your people plant the bean fields. It was a promise of a life neither of them believed they would see. It was a dream of summer, spoken in the middle of a war. They held on to it, holding on to each other, a silent vow in the shadow of the gallows. A soft knock on the door broke the spell. They sprang apart, 2 soldiers caught off guard. Ash had his knife in his hand before the second knock came.
It is Elena,
her voice whispered from the hall.
And I have Ruby with me. Let us in.
Ash slid the bar back. Elena Rios entered, followed by Ruby, the saloon girl Maddox had harassed. Ruby was pale, her eyes wide with terror, but she was holding a small, folded piece of paper.
She has it,
Elena said, her voice sharp and low.
Rourke thinks she is just a scared girl. He and Maddox were talking, loud, in the saloon. She heard it all.
Ruby's voice trembled, but she spoke.
They are moving the cash at 7 o'clock,
from the bank to the armored rail car. But that is not all. The Gatling gun is not with them. It is hidden at the old livery. At the same time, Maddox is taking a second crew. He is riding for the basin to meet the work crew. They are going to start building the dam.
He is splitting his forces, Ash said. A flicker of something, a plan, lit his eyes.
And this, Ruby said, holding out the paper.
I stole it from the telegraph office desk.
It is the confirmation code for the wire transfer. Rourke is cabling the final payment for the land at 8 o'clock. Once he sends this, it is finished.
He has to be stopped,
Clara said. She looked at Ash.
We have to split too.
He nodded. The intimate moment was over. They were partners. They were generals. Elena, Ash said. You, Clara, and Ruby. You will go to the telegraph office. Li Wei is already watching it. He will be your key.
What are we going to do?
Clara asked. You are going to stop that code, Ash said. And you are going to send your own message. He pointed to the oilcloth bundle on the table, the one holding the 2 ledgers. You are going to tell the world the truth. Send it to the marshal. Send it to the newspapers in Santa Fe. Send it to anyone who will listen. Use their own wire against them. Post the pages on the street if you have to.
They have guards,
Elena said.
3,
Ruby whispered.
I saw them.
We will handle the guards, Clara said, and she was surprised by the steel in her own voice.
And you?
Clara asked Ash. Rourke wants to move his cash, Ash said. A cold, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time. I will help him. Boone, the vaqueros. We will meet his armored car. We are not just stopping a dam. We are seizing the assets of a criminal. We will have him and his money, waiting for the marshal.
It is a suicide,
Elena said, her face pale. It is a plan, Ash said. It is the only one. They stood there, a strange, small alliance. A saloon keeper, a saloon girl, a cook, and a dine warrior. Clara looked at the ledgers. She looked at Ruby, who was visibly shaking.
Ash, she said, her voice low. I am a cook. I can burn a man with flour, but this is soldier's work. What if I fail? What if I am not?
He stopped her. He put his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. His grip was hard, grounding her. You faced Maddox at the market. You sewed a man's leg closed in a blizzard. You did not fail, he said. His eyes locked on hers. He spoke with a simple, brutal honesty. Nobody is perfect. We are not perfect. We just stand together, that is all. He reached inside his shirt and pulled a small, worn leather pouch from a thong around his neck. It was small and flat and warm from his skin. This, he said, this is for Hozo, for balance, for walking in beauty. My grandmother gave it to me. He lifted the thong over his head and placed it over hers. The small pouch settled against her collarbone, a warm, soft weight. It was the most intimate gift he could have given. It was an amulet. It was a promise. Clara raised her hand, her fingers closing over the small pouch. Go, Ash said, his voice now hard. Elena, get them to the Blue Lark. Get ready. Li Wei will meet you. Elena nodded, pulling Ruby by the arm. Clara paused at the door, her eyes meeting Ash's. There was nothing left to say. The promise of summer bean fields, the scent of her hair, the warm leather on her skin. It was all that existed. She turned and followed Elena into the dark hallway. Ash turned to the adjoining door. He knocked, a hard, sharp rap. Boone. The door opened. Isaiah Boone stood there, his face carved with pain. He was fully dressed, his gun belt strapped on over his bandages. Sergeant, Ash said, can you ride? Boone looked at him, his eyes clear. I can ride, he said, and I can shoot. Ash nodded. He grabbed his rifle. They walked out of the hotel, 2 shadows moving toward the livery, toward the vaqueros. toward the first, pale gray light of a day that would decide everything. The mud in Sundown's Main Street was ankle-deep, a cold, thick soup of melted snow and red clay. At 6:45 in the morning, the light was a weak, gray promise. But the town was already awake, its life defined by the deafening roar of the San Juan River. The flood was at its peak, a brown, churning monster that vibrated the ground. Clara Avery, Elena Rios, and Ruby huddled in the alley across from the telegraph office. The oilcloth packet containing the 2 ledgers was heavy under Clara's arm, a physical weight that matched the terror in her stomach. Li Wei was with them, his face pale and set. He was no longer a clerk. He was a conspirator. "The 2 main guards just left," Li Wei whispered, his eyes on the office. "They go to the saloon for breakfast. The operator, Mr. Hemlock, is alone. He will be on the line to Cheyenne for the next 10 minutes, getting the morning reports. 1 guard, a new man, is inside with him. We have to be fast." "How?" Elena said, her hand tight on the heavy, cloth-wrapped object she carried. "Ruby," Li Wei said, "you must be what he expects to see." Ruby's face was ashen. She had been crying, but now her fear was frozen into a brittle mask. What do I do?" "You are a girl," Elena said, her voice hard but not unkind. "You are cold. You are looking for a drink. You need $1. You know the part. Knock on the door. When he opens it, distract him." Ruby nodded, her whole body shaking. She pulled her thin shawl tighter and stepped out of the alley, a small, pathetic figure stumbling through the mud. She reached the telegraph office and pounded on the door. "Please," she cried, her voice high and desperate. "Let me in, it is so cold." They heard a muffled shout from inside. The door opened a crack. The new guard, a big man with a dull face, looked out. "We are closed. Go away." "Please, Mr." Ruby sobbed, leaning against the door frame. "Just for a minute. I can pay you. I just need to get warm." The guard looked up and down the empty street. He saw a saloon girl, easy prey. A small, cruel smile touched his lips. "All right, get in, but be quick about it." He opened the door and pulled her inside. "Now," Li Wei said. Clara, and Elena ran across the mud-soaked street. They did not go to the front. They went to the small side window. Li Wei had studied it. It was cheap glass. Elena unwrapped the object she carried. It was a cast-iron fry pan from the Blue Lark. With a short, brutal swing, she shattered the glass. Li Wei was through the opening before the glass finished falling. Clara, hiking her skirts, scrambled in after him. The operator, Hemlock, jumped from his chair, his hand going for a pistol on his desk. Li Wei, light as a cat, kicked the chair out from under him. The operator went down. The guard at the front door spun around, his gun coming up. "What the—" Ruby, in a surge of pure, primal fear, sank her teeth into his gun hand. He howled, a sound of pained surprise, and shoved her away. Elena Rios stepped out of the back room and swung her iron skillet in a flat, heavy arc. It connected with the side of the guard's head with a sound like a wet axe splitting wood. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in a heap, out cold. The operator, Hemlock, lunged for Li Wei. Elena, without pausing, hit him too. He fell beside the guard. Silence, broken only by the click-clack-clack of the untended telegraph key, spitting out random noise. "Bar the door," Clara said, her voice shaking. Li Wei dropped the heavy oak bar into place. They were secure. For now. "Get them tied," Elena ordered, pulling rope from her bag. Clara turned to Li Wei. He was already at the desk, his fingers gently touching the key, as if greeting an old friend. "Can you do it?" Clara asked. Li Wei looked at her, his dark eyes shining with a terrible, bright intensity. "I have practiced this in my head for a month." His fingers began to fly.
Click, clack, click, click, clack, 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 click. It was not noise anymore. It was language. It was truth. To Federal Marshal Kane, Durango, he murmured as he sent. To the Santa Fe New Mexican, to the Cheyenne Daily Leader, to the Governor, Arizona Territory. What are you sending? Clara asked, unwrapping the precious ledgers. I am sending, Lee Wei said, his fingers a blur. The truth, Rourke, Silas, wanted for conspiracy, bribery, and attempted murder. All evidence held in Sundown. Stop. Willow Basin water rights secured by fraud. Stop. Surveyor Harris paid $500. Stop. Sheriff Dugan on payroll. Stop. The pages, Elena said, returning from tying the men. Clara ripped the first page from the red ledger. The list of payments to Dugan. Elena snatched it. She and Ruby, her terror now replaced with a wild, fierce energy, grabbed a hammer and nails. They unlocked the door, ran outside, and nailed the single page to the thick oak frame of the telegraph office. Let them read it, Elena said, her face grim. They went back inside. Lee Wei was still sending. Clara began to feed him the details, line by line, from both books. At that exact moment, on the high pass road that led to the railroad depot, Ashki Nez held up his hand. Isaiah Boone, his face slick with sweat and pain, stopped his horse. Miguel and Juan, the two vaqueros, fanned out behind him. They were in a narrow cut, the canyon wall on one side, a sheer drop to the roaring river on the other. A perfect choke point. They are coming, Ash said. They heard the rattle of harnesses and the groaning axles of a heavy wagon. It was not the armored car. It was the transport to the armored car. A heavy freight wagon, pulled by 4 mules, appeared around the bend. It was flanked by 8 of Rourke's railroad guards, all armed with rifles. Now, Sergeant, Ash said. Boone raised his rifle. He was a sharpshooter, trained by the 9th Cavalry. His ribs were on fire, his leg a dull ache, but his hands were steady. He took a breath. He squeezed. The lead rider, the one holding the reins of the mule team, slumped forward, a neat, small hole in his chest. Yee-ha! Miguel and Juan let out their high, ululating cries, firing their pistols into the air. They charged from the rocks, not at the wagon, but at the horses of the rear guards, spooking them. The guards scattered, firing at shadows. Ash, on his pony, moved like a ghost. He ignored the guards. He went for the wagon. 2 men on the driver's bench raised their rifles. Ash was already there. He vaulted from his pony onto the wagon, pulling both men from the bench with the force of his attack. They crashed to the muddy road. Ash had the wagon, but the fight was not over. Well, well, Ash, a voice drawled from the back. The heavy canvas tarp on the wagon bed was thrown back. Cole Maddox was there. He was sitting on a heavy wooden crate, and next to him, gleaming with a dull, oily menace, was a Gatling gun, its brass barrels aimed directly at him. Rourke was not sure. Maddox grinned, his hand on the crank. He said, "Maybe they are just stupid. Maybe they will try." "You are stupid." Ash. Maddox had not gone to the basin. He was the personal guard for the cache, and he had the new toy. "Goodbye," Maddox said, and he began to crank. The gun whirred. It clicked. A single, heavy slug tore out, ripping a chunk of wood from the canyon wall. And then, thunk. Maddox stared at the gun. He cranked again. Nothing. The mechanism was jammed, solid as a rock. "What?" he snarled, hitting the breech with his fist. He did not see the small piece of metal, no bigger than a thumbnail, that Lee Wei had hammered into the gear track late last night in the dark livery. Lee Wei had told Ash, "It will fire, once, maybe twice, then it will break its own teeth." Ash did not wait. He ran the length of the wagon bed and dove at Maddox. Maddox, roaring in fury, drew his pistol. He fired. The shot went wide. Ash threw his long knife. The blade spun once and buried itself in the wood of Maddox's pistol grip, the force ripping the gun from his hand and sending it flying. Maddox clutched his bleeding, shattered hand. He was unarmed. Ash stood over him, his knife quivering in the wagon wall. He pulled his second knife from his belt. His face was a mask of cold rage. He saw the rope burns on his own neck. He saw Boone's wound. He saw Clara's terror. "Go on," Maddox spat, blood dripping from his hand. "Kill me. You have been wanting to." Ash raised the knife, and he held it. He saw Clara's face at the stone bridge, the legal way. He slammed the pommel of the knife, hard, against Maddox's temple. The man slumped without a sound. Ash turned. Boone and the vaqueros had the remaining guards covered. The fight was over. The cash and the Gatling gun were theirs. Down at the depot, Silas Rourke paced the wooden platform. His armored car was waiting, steam hissing, but the cash wagon was late, very late. Sheriff Dugan was with him, his face nervous. "They will be here. Mr. Rourke, Maddox knows the way." "He had better," Rourke said. He pulled a heavy leather bag from his coat. "Your final payment, Sheriff, for ensuring the town stays quiet." Dugan took the bag, his fat fingers closing on the coins. "You can count on me." "Rourke." The voice was not Ash's. It was Elena Rios. Rourke and Dugan turned. They froze. It was not a crowd. It was the town. A wave of silent, angry people was walking toward the depot. Miners with pick handles. Pastor Ben, his Bible in his hand. The silent, watchful Chinese rail workers, their tools in their hands. And at the front, Elena, holding a piece of paper. "What is this?" Dugan blustered, stepping forward. "Go home. This is official railroad business." "Read it, Sheriff," Elena shouted, her voice ringing out. "Read what we'd found. Read about your services rendered." She threw the ledger page at his chest. Dugan stared at the page, his face turning a blotchy white. "It is a lie forgery." "It is not a lie." Clara Avery stepped out from the crowd. Ruby and Lee Wei were at her side. She was holding the red ledger high, for everyone to see. "It is all here, Mr. Rourke. Every dollar you paid him, every lie you told." Rourke's composure, his Eastern Polish, shattered. He saw the book. He saw the crowd. He saw his entire empire evaporating. He pulled his derringer, a small, silver pistol, from his vest. He aimed it directly at Clara. "Give me that book," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. The crowd gasped and fell back. Rourke. Ash's voice, a second wagon, the one they had taken from Maddox, thundered into the depot square. Ash was at the reins. Boone was beside him, rifle steady. Maddox was tied, unconscious, in the back. The vaqueros fanned out, sealing the square. Rourke was trapped. He pressed the muzzle of the derringer to Clara's temple. "Shoot me, Ash. I will take her with me. Back off." Ash did not raise his rifle. He held his hands wide, appealing to the town. "Look at him," Ash's voice boomed over the noise of the river. "This is your progress. This is your law hiding behind a woman. Pastor Ben, do you see him, Lee Wei, Elena? Tell the town what you see." The crowd surged, a low growl rising from their throats. "Put the gun down, Mr. Rourke." The voice was quiet, shaking, but clear. Deputy Cole. He had stepped out from behind Dugan, his own pistol drawn. It was not aimed at Rourke. It was aimed at his boss. "Sheriff Dugan," Cole said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy and accepting bribes." "Cole, you are finished," Dugan snarled. "Put that away." "No, sir," Cole said, his hand steadying. "I believe you are." A high, sharp train whistle cut through the tension. It was not Rourke's engine. It was a new train, rolling in on the main line. It stopped with a hiss of steam. A tall man in a black coat stepped onto the platform.
He was wearing a federal marshal's badge. "I got a wire," the marshal said, his eyes taking in the scene. "From a Mr. Lee Wei. Said there was a revolution in sundown. Seems I am just in time to accept the surrender." Rourke stared at the marshal. He looked at Ash. He looked at the angry crowd. He looked at the red ledger in Clara's hand. It was over. He dropped the derringer. In the chaos, as the marshal barked orders and Deputy Cole put the cuffs on a sputtering Sheriff Dugan, no one was watching the wagon. No one except Ash. Maddox, his hands raw, had finally worked his ropes free. He slipped over the side of the wagon, unseen by the crowd, and vanished into the muddy alleyway between the saloon and the general store. Ash saw him go. He watched the alley for a long second. He could catch him. He looked at Clara. She was still standing, the heavy ledger clutched to her chest. Now that the gun was gone, the strength that had held her up had vanished. She was shaking, a violent, bone-rattling tremor that shook her from head to foot. Her hand, clutching the book, was trembling so badly she could barely hold it. Ash did not go after Maddox. He let the killer go. He walked through the crowd, pushing past the marshal and his deputies. He walked right up to Clara. He did not speak. He did not touch her face. He did not pull her into his arms. He simply reached out and put his large, steady hand over her trembling ones, holding the book with her. He held her hands, and his own, still, until the shaking stopped. The depot master, seeing the guns were down and the law had arrived, ran to the platform bell. He pulled the rope. The high, clear, brass bell rang out. Again and again, the sound cutting through the roar of the river, a bright, clean sound of justice, echoing over the town like a church bell on Sunday. The ringing of the depot bell was the sound of a fever breaking. It cut through the roar of the flood, and for the first time in months, the air in sundown did not taste of fear. Federal Marshal Kane was a man of swift, cold action. Within an hour, Silas Rourke and the now whimpering Sheriff Dugan were in leg irons, locked in the town's own jail under the guard of Deputy Cole, who had been provisionally appointed as the acting law. Rourke's eastern suit was stained with mud, his silk vest torn. He had tried to bribe the marshal. Marshal Kane had simply added that to the list of charges. The cash from the wagon, a staggering sum of nearly $40,000, was impounded in the bank vault, not as Rourke's property, but as evidence. The Gatling gun, its gear track still broken, was locked in the sheriff's office. Rourke's hired guards, the men who had not fled, were disarmed and placed under house arrest in the hotel, their wages frozen. A warrant, carrying a $500 reward, was issued for the arrest of Cole Maddox, fugitive, wanted for attempted murder and conspiracy. The telegraph key, now under Lee Wei's official supervision, clicked for hours, sending the marshal's reports and the damning contents of the ledgers across the territory. By noon, a separate detachment of men, led by Miguel and Juan and deputized by the marshal, rode out to Willow Basin. They found the work crew Rourke had sent, a half-dozen cold, confused men who had just begun to set posts for a temporary dam. Seeing the marshal's men, and with no Maddox to lead them, they surrendered without a single shot. By sundown, the posts were pulled, and the water of Willow Basin flowed free, as it always had. The following day, the town gathered on the small hill behind Pastor Ben's clapboard church. The thaw was in full force. The snow was gone, replaced by a soft, damp earth that smelled of spring. They were burying two men, miners, who had been caught in the crossfire at the depot. Two innocent lives lost in Rourke's desperate final move. Pastor Ben read from his Bible, his voice thick with emotion. But the town was not just there for a funeral. They were there for a reckoning. When the pastor finished, Isaiah Boone stepped forward. He was not in uniform, just a clean shirt, his arm in a sling from his broken ribs, his legs stiff. He stood over the graves. "I did not know these men," Boone said, his deep voice carrying over the crowd.
But I knew the fight they died in. We have lived in the shadow of men like Rourke and Dugan for too long. We let them, because we were scared, or we were divided, or we were just trying to survive the winter. But that ends. Today, that ends. He looked at the crowd. He saw the Chinese workers, standing respectfully to one side. He saw the vaqueros. He saw the miners, their faces scrubbed clean. He saw Elena Rios. "This town," Boone said, "needs a watch. Not a sheriff who takes his pay from one man, but a watch that answers to all of us." "And you should lead it, Sergeant," a miner shouted. A chorus of agreement went up. Marshal Kane, standing at the back, nodded. He recognized a true election when he saw one. Isaiah Boone, the ex-soldier, the man without a side, was now captain of the Sundown Town Watch. The healing began, not with words, but with work. The town was broken, but the pieces were all there. Lee Wei, given a significant bonus by the marshal for his civic duty, did not take the train east. His first act was to take his tools to the back of the Blue Lark. The saloon's well pump had been broken for a month, forcing Elena to haul water from the street. Lee Wei, with his patient, clever hands, dismantled the complex iron mechanism, replaced a worn gear, and had it working in an hour. Elena, her face streaked with tears and grease, offered him free drinks for life. He accepted, but only requested tea. Clara did not go back to the line shack. It was a memory, a fortress that had served its purpose. She moved into the small room behind the Blue Lark's kitchen, and the kitchen, which had been just hers, became the town's. It was her idea. Rourke's impounded assets included a warehouse full of foodstuffs, bought to feed his damn crew. Marshal Kane, in a fit of practical justice, turned it all over to the town. Clara, with Elena at her side and Ruby as her first paid apprentice, opened the Blue Lark's kitchen as a communal stove. She taught the miners' wives, who knew only how to boil beef, how to make her skillet bread, how to stretch a rabbit into a stew for 10. She taught hygiene, the simple, life-saving magic of boiling water and lye soap. The Chinese railroad workers, who had always cooked apart, were invited in. Their leader, a quiet older man, watched Clara work for a day. Then he came back, offering a small bag of precious, dried mushrooms and ginger. He showed her how to add them to her broth. The spring kitchen was born, a place that no longer smelled just of bacon and coffee, but of sage and ginger and baking bread. It was the smell of rebirth. A week later, Marshal Kane left, taking Rourke and Dugan with him on the train to Cheyenne for a federal trial. The ledgers, both the black and the red, went with him as primary evidence. The territorial court, upon seeing the dispatches, issued an immediate injunction, freezing all of Rourke's land transactions. The false survey was voided. Before he left, the marshal met with the town's new leaders in the saloon: Captain Boone, Elena Rios, Pastor Ben, Miguel, representing the vaqueros, the senior Chinese clerk, Mr. Chow, and, at the insistence of all of them, Clara Avery and Ashki Nez. "I cannot appoint a new sheriff," the marshal said. "That is not my jurisdiction, but you all have a bigger problem. The water." "It is free," Miguel said, his hand on his hat. "For now," the marshal said. "But the railroad will be back. Others like Rourke will come. You need a legal framework." And so, on a Tuesday, the Sundown Water Committee was formed. It was a revolutionary document for that time and place. It had 7 signatories, 1 for the Dine, Ash, 1 for the ranchers, Miguel, 1 for the railroad workers, Mr. Chow, 1 for the merchants, Elena Rios, 1 for the miners, 1 for the church, and 1 for the town watch, Boone. They decreed that the water of Willow Basin was a community resource, to be shared, with rules for drought and rules for access, binding on all. The law was no longer one man's. It belonged to the mud, and the rock, and the people. That evening,
Clara sat alone in her small room behind the kitchen. The sounds of the saloon were muffled, a low murmur of voices and music. The window was open, and for the first time, the air was not cold. It was soft, carrying the scent of wet pine and the first green things. She lit a lantern and took out a pen and a single sheet of paper. She sat for a long time, just looking at the blank page. Then, she began to write. She did not address it to her family back east. She did not address it to anyone. It was a letter to herself, to the woman she had been 6 months ago, the woman who had arrived in sundown looking for nothing more than a winter's wages. "You will not believe this," she wrote. "You will not believe the cold. You will be afraid. You will be so afraid that your bones feel like ice. You will see men hang, and you will see men killed. You will be hungry. You will lie. You will do a terrible, foolish, brave thing. And you will find that your hands are stronger than you know. You will learn to shoot a rifle. You will learn to sew a man's flesh. You will learn to trust a man who does not speak. And you will learn to stand up to men who shout. Do not be afraid of the winter. It is here to teach you. You are not looking for a job. You are looking for a home. You have found it." She stopped, her hand aching. She looked at the words. She folded the paper, not once but many times, until it was a small, thick square. She did not need to send it. She just needed to write it. She felt a presence at her open door. Ash was standing there, silent as he always was. He had been in the hills for 2 days, visiting his people, telling them the news. He stepped into the small room. He looked clean. He wore a simple linen shirt, not his heavy buckskins. He looked younger. The lines of worry around his eyes softened. Clara stood up. The small leather pouch he had given her was still around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. She could feel its warmth against her skin. He held out his hand. In his palm lay the pouch. "I saw you were not wearing it," he said. I keep it safe," she said, confused, her hand going to her neck. "No," he said, stepping closer. "It is not mine to give." He had misunderstood. She fumbled with the clasp at her neck and pulled the small pouch free, the thong warm from her skin. She held it out to him. "It is yours," she said. "Amulets are. They are for the person they belong to. I was just borrowing its strength." He looked at the small, dark pouch, resting in her palm. It still carried her warmth. He looked at her face, at the small smudge of flour on her cheek she had missed. He closed his hand over hers, his fingers curling around her fist, enclosing the pouch. "I am not taking it back," he said, his voice low. "The hoso, the balance, it was mine. Now it is ours." He gently pushed her hand, still closed in his, back toward her own chest. "You do not borrow it. You keep it. For both of us. You are the one who knows how to keep the fire." He released his grip, leaving her to hold the small, warm weight. She looked down at her hand, then up at him. She had saved his life. He had saved hers. And now, the honor that had bound them, that had been a debt, was something else entirely. It was a shared, common thing, as real as the skillet, as necessary as the water. "Ash," she said, her voice barely a whisper. What now?" He looked past her, out the open window, toward the sound of the free-flowing river. "Now," he said, "the spring comes, and we eat." Summer arrived in the high desert not as a gentle relief, but as a sudden, clear heat that baked the red clay and sent shimmers rising from the mesas. The San Juan River, which had been a brown, churning monster, retreated. It settled back into its banks, no longer a flood, but a clear, green artery, the life of the valley. The town of Sundown, which had barely survived the winter, now thrived. To celebrate, the new Sundown Water Committee declared a day of festival. They did not hold it in the muddy Main Street, but at the source of their new life, Willow Basin. It was a sight no one in the territory had ever seen. The banks of the stream were crowded with families, children who had been huddled by stoves for 4 months, their faces pale, now splashed and shouted in the clear, cold shallows, their skin brown under the sun. On the high bank, under the new leaves of the cottonwoods, the town's music played. It was not one sound, but many. Miguel and Juan, the vaqueros, sat on a wagon bed, their guitars playing the fast, bright corridos of Mexico. A few yards away, Ash's Dine cousins sat in a circle, their steady, resonant drumming providing a heartbeat that seemed to come from the earth itself. The sounds did not fight. They wove together, a new song for a new town. Isaiah Boone, his captain's badge polished, walked the perimeter. His ribs had healed, and he moved with only a slight, proud stiffness in his leg. He was not watching for enemies. He was just watching. He saw Li Wei and Mr. Chow, the railroad clerks, sharing a jug of cider with the miners they had once been separated from. He saw Ruby, no longer pale and terrified, but flushed with sun, organizing the children's foot races. And at the center of it all, between the drums and the guitars, was the fire. There were 3 massive pits, and Clara Avery presided over them. She was not the itinerant cook who had begged for a job at the Blue Lark. She was the heart of this celebration. Her face was flushed with heat, her apron stained with grease and berry juice, and she had never looked more beautiful. She was the woman who had taught them how to survive, and now she was teaching them how to feast. She was serving roasted mutton, seasoned with wild sage that Ash had brought her, and a rich stew made with the first beans from the vaqueros' ranches. But her masterpiece was the bread. She had her heavy skillet, the one with Ash's carving, and a dozen more just like it. She was making her cornbread, but also fry bread, taught to her by Ash's aunts, and a special sweetbread using the ginger and spices gifted by Mr. Chow. It was the kitchen of the line shack, reborn as a banquet. Ashki Nez stood apart, watching her. He had been quiet all day, observing the alliance he had helped to forge. He saw Boone walk over to him, a tin plate of food in his hand. "Captain," Ash said, a respectful nod. "Ash," Boone replied. They stood for a moment, eating Clara's food. "Word came on the wire this morning," Boone said, his voice low, "from a marshal up in Utah Territory." Ash did not look at him, but his chewing slowed. "Maddox." "He joined a new gang of rustlers," Boone said. "They hit a bank in a mining town. He killed a deputy. They are on the run, but they are trapped in the high canyons. They will find him. He will hang." Ash nodded, swallowing. "He will." "It is over," Boone said. "No," Ash said, his gaze fixed on the celebration. "It is beginning." He watched Clara. She was laughing, her head thrown back. As Ruby told her a story, the small leather pouch he had given her was visible, a dark cord against her throat. Later, as the sun began to paint the canyon walls in deep reds and purples, Ash found her. She was packing her skillets, her face tired but happy. "You are riding," she said, seeing him in his saddle leathers. "Just to the South Ridge," he said, "to check the grazing lands for my people." She paused. She untied her apron and folded it. She had a clean kitchen towel, tucked into the belt of her skirt. It was not fancy. It was bleached white, but the edges were faintly scorched, and it smelled of wood smoke and bacon. It was the smell of her life's work. She held it out to him. "For the dust," she said. He took the towel. It was still warm from her. He did not put it in his pack or tuck it in his belt. He slowly, deliberately, tied it to the horn of his saddle. It was a domestic, simple thing, a banner of smoke and bread, tied to a warrior's horse. It was their new home. "Ride with me," he said, his voice quiet. "Now?" she asked, surprised. "Before the light is gone."
He put her on his own horse, riding behind him, her arms around his waist. He did not take her to his camp. He took her up the high, familiar trail, the one they had climbed in the blizzard, the one they had descended in the mud. Now it was green, small, bright flowers clung to the rocks. The air was warm. He stopped the horse at the high mesa. He dismounted and lifted her down. The line shack was still there. It was just a small, empty box of wood, the door swinging on one hinge. It was no longer a fortress. It was just a shed. They walked to the edge of the cliff, where they had stood that first night, looking down at the frozen, dead basin. Now, the valley below was alive. The basin was a pool of dark, clear turquoise. They could see the small, bright sparks of the festival fires far below. They could hear the faint, blended sound of the guitars and the drums, carried up on the warm wind. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the summer twilight settle.
"The lie we told,"
Clara said, her voice soft.
"It feels like 100 years ago."
"It was," Ash said. "That man died, that woman died, in the snow." She looked at him. He was not the hard, cold man from the line shack. The anger was gone. The suspicion was gone. His eyes were clear, and they were fixed on her.
"Clara Avery,"
he said, and it was the first time she had ever heard him say her full name. He reached into the pocket of his linen shirt. He did not pull out a ring of gold or silver. He pulled out a thin, simple cord. It was braided from sweetgrass, which smelled like summer, and horsehair, dyed red from the rocks and black from the charcoal. It was something he had made. His hands, his time. "It is not a fine thing," he said.
"It is,"
she whispered, her fingers touching the braid. He did not kneel. He stood in front of her, as her equal, as the man who had held her hand while it trembled. "I have spent many springs alone, Ashki Nez," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough. "Watching the ice break, it is a lonely sound." He held the simple, braided cord out to her. "I do not want to spend another spring alone." Clara looked at the simple braid. She looked at his face. She saw the winter they had survived. She saw the summer they were building. She saw the man who had stood by her, who had protected her honor, and who had shared his own. She did not cry. She smiled. She took the cord from his hand. "Nor do I," she said. He did not pull her into a desperate embrace. He just took her hand, the one that had sewn his friend's leg, the one that had fought with flour, and he held it. They stood on the edge of the world. The wind that had once tried to kill them now just a soft breeze in her hair. She leaned her head against his shoulder, not in fear, but in peace. She was home. Ash looked out at the vast, darkening land. He looked at the woman beside him, her hair smelling of smoke and the wild sage of the mesa. He had said the words in the dark, in the terror of the hotel room, a whispered hope. Now he said them in the light, as a fact. He bent his head, his lips brushing her hair. "You're my spring." And the summer began. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and give that hype button a press so this story can be heard by more people.